afternoon. I'm Penny Bishop, Dean of the BU Wheelock College of Education and Human Development, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this month's edition of Conversations with the Dean. In this webinar series, as some of you know, we focus on a range of important topics within education. Our discussions reflect our deep commitment to transforming systems, particularly those that are inequitable. Each webinar focuses on the complexity of the particular issue at hand and seeks to uncover the transformational opportunities to see students and communities thrive. Which brings us to today. As educators, we play a really important role in setting students up for future success. And by fostering social emotional skills, by helping explore careers, by supporting executive functioning, in all those ways, we support not only academic growth, but also learners' self-awareness and identity formation. So today we're going to talk about how educators are supporting positive youth development by integrating something called MyCAP, which stands for My Career and Academic Plan, MyCAP activities into school programming. And I'm really lucky to be joined today by 4 experts who are highly skilled in connecting students to their future. They'll share their experiences of working with students and also talk about how they use MyCAP to help students define their career and life goals based on their unique pattern of interests and skills and values. So it's my pleasure to welcome Erin, Jodi, Sugeily, and Scott. I'm really looking forward to our discussion today, and I especially appreciate that our Boston Public Schools colleagues have taken time to join us today. We love talking with our friends and partners at BPS, and we also know this is a really, really busy time of year. So thank you for making time for that. So I was hoping that you could each provide a brief introduction, and it might be fun for us and for our audience if we had some fun with this. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, and if you were to pick 3 or 4 words to describe your work with students using MyCAP and its impact, what might they be? Erin, I'm gonna ask you to start.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be here. And we have an amazing panel group. So this will be a great discussion. My name is Erin Jaques. I use she, they pronouns. I'm the Assistant Director of College and Career Advising Programs K-12 for Boston Public Schools. A few words that come to mind: dreams, access, and opportunity.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Jodi, how about you?
Hi, everyone. Delighted to be here. My name is Jodi, then she, her pronouns. I'm a school counselor at Boston Green Academy, and I work primarily with students in 11th and 12th grade. And the 4 words that come to mind for MyCAP are actually sort of words that I live by. I call them the 4 E's: exposure, exploration, experience, and engagement.
Thanks so much, Jodi. Sugeily, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sugeily. Before I introduce myself, I just want to name that it's dismissal, so you might hear a little noise. It's good noise. But like I said, I'm Sugeily Santos. I am the middle school counselor at the Curley K-8 school in Jamaica Plain. I work very closely with 7th and 8th graders and our middle school students in our substantially separate program. And the 3 words that come to me right now: it's fun, it's powerful, and it's accessible.
Thanks very much, Sugeily. I love how you all have different words. It's really interesting. It's going to be a really interesting conversation today to draw on all of those. How about you, Scott? Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi. So Scott Solberg, his pronouns. So professor here at Boston University, I co-direct the Center for Future Readiness, and many of you on the call know, been working hard on designing and thinking about it. And so mine isn't that I'm working with students. My area is working with schools and developing this. And for me, it's inspiring. It's passionate to see the energy and the flow, and so uplifting. So those would be some of the big keywords that come to mind.
Terrific. Thank you. So before we go any further, I just need to do something. I need to give a big shout out to Sugeily, because Sugeily was actually just recognized as the 2024 Boston Public Schools School Counselor of the Year. So I kind of just want to give a big shout out. Woo! to Sugeily for that, because that's extraordinary. It's really important work that you do, and it's great to have you here today. And also, thank you for just sort of setting the stage that you are, in fact, at school, and I believe that Jodi is as well. And so who knows what could happen in the next few minutes together. We'll see. So on to the subject at hand. Audience, I want to encourage you to pose any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and we will do our very best to address them along the way. And I'm going to start off with you, Erin. I'd love to hear a little bit about your role. So as I understand it, you lead the district level approach to college and career advising systems and objectives across all schools K to 12 and connected district systems. That sounds really, really big. Can you tell us more about the work that you do and how you came to work with Scott and BU Wheelock and MyCAP in particular?
Definitely. Well, first and foremost, I'm part of an incredible team. And so definitely like shout out to my colleagues in the Office of Secondary Schools. And I have an incredible group of counselors across schools as well that I get to work with. So they make my lives a lot easier. I think, my role really, I describe it as very much the connector across a lot of different systems and structures. And so when we think about career and academic planning, we are also thinking about students in pathways programs or early college programming, students who are on IEPs, and this is part of their transition planning process. And so it's really my role to kind of hold all of those connective pieces and make sure that folks have the resources and support that they need to effectively serve and support their own students. And so I love that I get to do that. My journey to this position, so prior to this, I was a middle school special education teacher. And so I was really doing transition planning with my students. And that was one of my favorite parts of the things that I got to do in support of middle grade students, because it's often the first time they've been asked some of these questions about their futures and about their dreams and their goals. I started working with Scott when I was doing my master's program through a program called Transformative Mentoring. He was helping Boston Public Schools build out this mentorship initiative, really using a lot of the MyCAP systems and strategies. And so that was my first glimpse, and it really brought together, like I said, a lot of my favorite parts of my job as a middle school teacher. And I loved getting to kind of be able to support the shepherding of resources and support systems for counselors, especially because I think really what I do now is try to empower our counselors so that they are able to lead this work in their own school buildings. So that's kind of my journey. And I'm really excited that we have two counselors here representing our current MyCAP system. So we currently have a 6th through 12th grade system that is pretty robust, and we are building out the elementary system alongside DESE to really think about what does this look like in the K to 5 space as we are introducing students to these topics. And so I'm going to go ahead and invite Sugeily in, because I think, they're really at the beginning of their MyCAP system. And I would love to hear from her about how this year is going. We're headed into their 2nd year of full implementation in their 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. So I'm sure you have a lot to share.
No, thank you, Erin. I think I was sharing with you that our 2nd year, there's a sense of ease and excitement around conversations with students about like college and career. And it definitely, this year, we are able to kind of troubleshoot some of the issues that we saw last year in particular. So last year was our first year rolling it out. And my main focus was really teacher buy-in. If I get the teachers to really understand what the work is and how they can embed it in every single aspect of their classes and connections with kids, like it becomes very easy. And I think that going into the 2nd year, the teachers are so excited about continuing this work, to the point where sometimes I'm like, okay, let's slow it down a little bit. So going into our 2nd year, we're really focusing on who did we exclude by accident, meaning like scheduling issues, who needs to be brought in. And 2 things that we talked about at the end of our school year was definitely getting our students who have ELD 1 and 2 codes to really be part of this conversation, because scheduling didn't allow it last year. And also bringing in parents. How do we, now that the teachers are excited, the kids are excited, like how do we engage in parents? So our 2nd year, we're working to sort of solve those two particular issues that we identified last year. And this year we have our all our ESL students participating in advisory, therefore they have access to the lessons. And then our next move is to figure out how we slowly bring in parents.
And I think, you know, it's really cool because MyCAP, sometimes when people hear that career and academic plan, they just think about the plan, right? And really, I think Sugeily's team has done a great job of thinking about how we are starting those conversations from a place of students exploring their interests and their strengths and their skills, and starting to like put some of those pieces in place on paper to create some sort of an artifact that travels with them and eventually ends up in the hands of folks like Jodi, who are then helping them make those post-secondary decisions. And so, Jodi, I'm wondering if you can speak to kind of what MyCAP looks like and feels like at BGA.
Sure. And so I'm almost a little jealous of Sugeily because I feel like the younger kids are so much more open to possibilities. And I think that's why I sort of use the 4 E's as my words: exposure, exploration, experience, and engagement, because I think a lot of it does come down to exposure and exploration. And so, you know, you always get the student, you know, whether they're in 8th grade or 9th grade, who's like, I'm going to be the NFL player. I'm going to be this, you know, recording artist. I'm going to, you know, even like, I'm going to be a nail technician. And why are they choosing these things? They're choosing these careers because they are engaged in them and exposed to them on a regular basis. The kid who spends 17 hours on a weekend playing basketball wants to be an NBA player because that's what he knows. What if we had students spending, you know, like 10 hours a month on a college campus? They're exposed to that. And so a lot of the work that I do here at my school is really trying to weave in these opportunities for students to see themselves as learners, see themselves as, you know, as students, and making this a sustainable initiative. So, you know, if, you know, when I retire or, you know, go on to, you know, do whatever the next thing is, that this work can continue regardless of who's in this role.
I know that it looks different in different places and different schools and also different levels. What does it look like when it works? Can you paint a picture of that? And I'll throw that out to any one of you who wants to jump in.
I'm curious. I'm really excited to see what Sugeily and Jodi will say to this, but I can offer from kind of a district system building perspective. I think when I stepped into this role, one of the really intentional decisions that we made as an office was to think about how MyCAP isn't just a checklist. It's a set of really intentionally crafted experiences and opportunities for students to do all of the things that both Sugeily and Jodi just described. And so I think when it's working well, you see, first of all, incredible professionals like this who are able to speak to their experiences in the systems within their own school settings that they have really customized and designed to fit their unique needs. You see teams of folks representative of not just our counselors. We want our counselors to be the leaders, but I think they can speak to some of the other folks in their buildings that they've collaborated with. I'm thinking CTE teacher, I'm thinking grade level representatives. And then ultimately you see students being able to share back those stories about their planning experiences and how that's influenced their post-secondary decisions. And I think either of you could speak to those examples as well.
I think for me, what does it look like when it works? That all students are talking about this. So I have a passion, especially for students with disabilities, because I think oftentimes we don't spend enough time talking about their strengths, right? And I love that the conversations that we're having, the activities that we're doing, the speakers that we're bringing, and the spaces that we're creating allows all of our students to really think about what does success mean to me, because success means different things to different people. I always use the example of my brother, who's deaf and legally blind, and for him, his job is very meaningful to him. His independence is very meaningful for him, and I want all my students to feel that way. Like, what do I bring? I might not do well in this section. I might struggle with this, but I think the work that with MyCAP really does well is allowing those conversations to happen so students can say, I do this really, really well. Oh, I know that for me, meaningful success means, part-time employment and independence, living on my own. And what do I need to do in order to get to that, right? So I sometimes worry that we wait for those conversations like junior year and kids are feeling so overwhelmed because they have other stressors, but how powerful it is to start having kids define that for themselves and having parents be on board. And also, so in terms of society, right? Success for me doesn't equal money. Money helps, but there are other goals that kids have for themselves that will allow them to be productive and independent in society. So in our school, those conversations are happening across the classrooms to the point where fifth grade is so jealous. They're like, we want to do this. And I'm like, we have to take a step. Let's make sure everything's working out perfectly before we start talking about lower grades. But that for me is success.
That's a great picture. Thank you for painting it. I really appreciate that. Jodi, were you going to jump in?
Sure. So I'll share just a brief story of what it looks like when it works well. A few years ago, I was collaborating with an 11th grade math teacher, and she was teaching a unit on, now you're going to make me remember math, graphs and charts and something along those lines. And we had students look in Navient and look at scattergrams of where students had been admitted for certain colleges. And she used that as her data set for the lesson that she was teaching. And so students kept looking at the different schools that were represented, looking at the different outliers, who was admitted, who was not admitted based on GPA. And they talked about that experience for the next 4 months. And so I think that's a great example because it was collaborative. The teacher and I really got together to use Navient as a tool to show them data, but it really helped students understand what they were doing in class, why that was important to their own trajectory and lives. And it got them talking and asking questions. So I think that is what success looks like.
Thank you. You sparked many questions for me as you were laying that out. I do want to interject because Annie Bell, a guest here, is asking a question. She'd like a reminder on what the 4 E's are. She has exposure, exploration. Help us with the other 2, will you, Jodi?
Exposure, exploration, experience, and engagement.
Fabulous. Thank you. When I was working with middle schoolers, we would often do things like, sort of try to use different pedagogies to engage them, whether it's project-based learning or service learning, place-based education. But the idea was to help ignite a passion for something, to be excited about something. And I think about that in relation to the goals work that is part of MyCAP and sort of the goals and aspirations building. And a couple of you had mentioned this idea of needing to see and be exposed to different careers. That is sort of what we do in life as we think about it. So is it on the basketball court? Is it on the college campus? Wherever you're creating your sense of identity. And I think sometimes we just sort of expect young people to have a passion, like, oh, here's a passion project opportunity. Why don't you just go do it, And not all students have that. Do either of you, Jodi or Sugeily, face that in this work at all? And if you do, what do you do about it?
I think you're right, especially middle school, like to have middle schoolers define their identity and the future, it's really, really hard. But an idea comes to mind. So I have this group of students who are trying to figure out their place in this school, but their place in this country as well. And we were having a conversation about, they wanted me to start an underground store to sell these like ramen noodle cups, right? And I really used that opportunity to be like, well, what does it take to start your own business? Right? What can you propose? Like, what's your pitch? Because that's what someone in the business world does, right? And then, there's conversations about their pitch in terms of like why I should do this. And then, I said, well, what's the cost like? And what's the time that goes into like me purchasing these items, right? And then one said, well, I know that my mom at BJ's, when she goes and he's breaking down all of these prices. So in that moment, I took an opportunity to say, you know, you guys want me to start this little side hustle, but look at all the work that takes into starting something like this. You seem really passionate about like the proposal and the idea of it, right? The mastermind, and you seem really passionate about the numbers and the profit. Like, so let's talk about the work that it takes to do a job like that. So I use that example because, you know, in that moment, I saw a little spark. But I also, I think I planted a seed where they're recognized there's work that goes behind just, you know, before you do something like that. So I think that, again, MyCAP allows, if you can change the way you see and think and talk to kids in every interaction, you have an opportunity to challenge their thinking about the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sugeily. I don't know, Jodi, if you wanted to, or Erin, if you wanted to build on that at all.
Yeah, I can talk a little. I think for 11th and 12th graders, especially at our school where there's a lot of things happening in junior year, there's a lot of projects, the stress really piles on. It's less about a passion project and more about finding what brings them joy. And a lot of our students, I think, you know, social media is a really big influence, and, you know, who has this side hustle and who's got this thing going on, and I want to be an influencer. And I really just think it's, you know, sometimes they just have to sort of dial back and tune out the noise and just think about what is it that brings them happiness. And so, you know, when students can find that, you know, we start to, and if they can't find that, that's okay too. And I like to let them know that sometimes knowing what you don't like is just as important as knowing what you like. And that's a starting point. And I think for my grade level that I work with, having a starting point is the most important because that can take you anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think something that comes to mind for me is, you know, there are lots of adults in a student's life, in a student's space. There are lots of folks in their network who they might be connecting with in different ways and maybe around an activity or around a specific space. But one of the great things, I think, in a lot of our school communities, we have our counselors speaking this language, we have our CTE teachers using this language, our special education teachers using this language, our partners. I saw something in the chat or the Q&A about higher ed. We're really grateful to folks like CACBU and the PIC who are also having these conversations with students, because to Suheily's point earlier about the soup story, like you never know when that is going to happen. And so having these trusted adults in their spaces who they're able to have these conversations with is really critical. And so I love getting to go in and kind of do presentations with larger groups of adults in the building. So they also have these resources and tools and can poke or ask questions the way that they were describing, you know, to elicit those reflections and to plant those seeds, because you don't really know when they're going to happen. And in the chat, Private Industry Council, our workforce development folks who are supporting our students with the career readiness and exploration piece. So, you know, I think there are lots of people in young people's spaces who can plant those seeds as well.
Mm-hmm. I like the seed planting idea. And it also strikes me that you really need to know students. You need to pay attention. You need to observe. You need to be in conversation in order to do some of that. Like the soup story is a great example of paying attention and knowing what's happening and then building on that. And similarly, Jodi, as you were describing, to think about helping students make sense of what brings them joy. It takes a lot of attention to do that well with people, and so I can imagine that it's also challenging, because as school counselors, there's a large load, or as special educators have a large load, and many teachers have a large load. And so it is sort of comforting to think that we're all doing this work together, and that common language that you're describing helps build a system, and then that there are, you know, Jean asked that question that you mentioned, Erin, that, you know, there are higher ed partners and other partners out there who are interested in doing that work as well. So it gives me hope to think that we're doing it all together. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think, similarly, our goals are the students and the young people feeling empowered to then go out and seek those conversations and seek those relationships and seek those opportunities. And I think that's one of the benefits as we think about what does this look like for younger students. Because if they're showing up to Jodi's office in senior year and they've got, well, I've had this whole set of experiences, these are the mentors that I've had, this is the internship I did, they're a lot more prepared to have that conversation about next steps, as opposed to, like Sugeily mentioned, junior year, we're just starting kind of this process. And so I think that's one of the benefits to really thinking about how is this a common language? How is this a culture shift in our schools when we think about preparing students for their futures and kind of all being on the same team in that process?
Mhm. Could you give some advice to Jean and others who might be interested in engaging, who are at the partner level? Maybe they're not in districts or schools, in terms of how they might help advance this important work?
I think there are the boring answers about contracts and the technical pieces. And I think there are the fun, easy, quick answers. And so part of it is going to spaces like this to build the language, the shared language. We're really lucky. We have a bunch of incredible videos that the Boston Opportunity Agenda supported us in filming that kind of capture the staff and student stories across a few of our schools and the way that our staff and students are talking about MyCAP, and just being able to kind of, when you're interacting with students or schools, say, like, we know there's this thing called MyCAP. We know students are setting goals. Maybe they're doing career fairs. Maybe you did the Strengths Explorer assessment with them at some point. Let's talk about that. And how can we support you in doing that? I think, there are some exciting opportunities to think about how you can help our schools fill some of those gaps in time and capacity. Things like supporting with career fairs, making sure we have folks who are ready to show up and have conversations with young people about their futures. Those are all opportunities that I think we are ready and eager for.
Yeah, and I can add to a little bit to that. So Erin, exactly, like, career fairs, internships. So a lot of schools in Boston Public Schools have an internship component. Our seniors are bound for a 6-week internship at the end of their senior year. And it's, there are challenges in finding places that are willing to host students, willing to mentor students, have the capacity to bring a student on board for 150 hours. And so those are things that can happen. Also, little things like transportation, bringing students somewhere. How are they going to get there? Buses are great. We're trying to work out now how to get a bus to bring students to a college fair. And so little things like that really go a long way.
Yeah, I can see how transportation might play into the equity piece of this pretty significantly in terms of access and opportunity. Are there creative ways you've seen us solve for that?
Jodi shaking her head for those of you who may not be watching. I think a lot of this starts with not being hesitant to start the conversation. I think there are folks who have the ideas, and it's just a matter of, again, like, my role is to start making those connections to the different pieces to, hey, you really should talk to our director of CTE. This is something we're trying to work out. I know I was just at the Curly earlier this week meeting with one of their new partners who's going to support them in staffing their career fair. So that was an opportunity that we were both presented with separately. And then I said, hey, actually, I think we should come back to this, and we should resume that conversation, because you might actually be really meeting a need that the Curly team has. And so starting those conversations and being able to make those connections to the folks who really need access to those resources.
And for the non-local folks, the Curly is what?
Oh,
Sugeily?
yeah, Curly K-8. We're in Jamaica Plain with K0 all the way to 8th grade. I wanted to say, I think that what I love about MyCAP too is there's so many possibilities, and maybe it's because I'm a thinker. I have big ideas, but I think of, like, even incorporating at some point community mapping and teaching kids to kind of see what their resources are in their community, and then to kind of troubleshoot with some of the issues that might come up, or the needs that students might have. And that's why I hear the issue about transportation, but also like who's in our community. And I find that MyCAP can create the space for kids and teachers to have those conversations and do assignments and do projects. There's a lot that can be done with MyCAP to look at even things about like what kind of businesses are in my community that maybe I can visit. And maybe because my mind is also thinking about the little ones, right? Which is something that would be like great to do with them. But that's sort of where my mind goes to partnerships, like who's across the street. Like we have a nail salon across the street, right? It would be awesome to find the time to connect with them and see kind of how they run things and make that connection between the business owner and our students. So again, I'm a dreamer, and I think that MyCAP allows that allows that. So that's why I get really excited about what more can I do with this.
Well, I love that you're a thinker and a dreamer. That's kind of what we're trying to do in schools, right? Is just create more of those. So that's awesome, Sugeily. Thank you. We have an interesting question from Annie Bell asking if there's any sample language that could be used to promote legislation requiring or encouraging the use of MyCAPs. And it makes me think about advocacy in general. So there may indeed be a good answer to Annie's question, and please do answer it, and maybe build on that by thinking about advocacy more generally, because legislation is one of many levers that we might consider. Anyone want to jump in?
My bulleted answer is we should talk to Scott. I think this is one of the things that I was really lucky to get to do with him at the Center for Future Readiness as we were writing the 2020 Condition of Career Readiness, the national report. Now there's another report out kind of looking at this type of scan to see like what language is being used, how are states getting creative, specifically as we think about funding, because this requires capacity, right? This requires folks who can do these types of trainings. We use systems to house the MyCAP information and to get access to these assessments for students. And those systems often cost money, right? And so what does that look like as we think about some of this advocacy? I also think that, we have an opportunity with a new IEP in Massachusetts where transition planning is really centered in that IEP process. And it's that first page, right? So what are your goals? What is your vision? And I think this creates an opportunity for us to, again, speaking to the like teamwork in our schools, how are we kind of sharing the load of thinking about, we've got to write this IEP, we've got to think about these different transition assessments. Well, actually, it just so happens many of our counselors have been having these conversations with students and doing these activities with students embedded in classrooms where all students are getting access to these conversations. So how is that woven into the IEP process? And I think those are some of the questions we're asking in our district offices, again, to kind of share the burden and distribute the workload across different roles and make sure they're all connected. And so when I think about legislation or I think about policy, those are some of the things that come to mind.
Yeah. That's really helpful. I'm wondering, Scott, if you have anything you want to build on with that, given your deep expertise in this area and also your awareness of the sort of state and national and perhaps international context here. Would you add?
Yeah, I think, apologize for the background noise. I think the big issue is we have to figure out what level. We do not want a federal mandate for the MyCAP because that just messes things up a lot. We in Massachusetts do not have a mandate, but we have significant funding and support. We have free access to 2 online career systems. As Erin was saying, that is one of the big expenses that we have to factor in when we talk about access and availability. And I think that, it's possible now in Massachusetts specifically because of the graduation requirements shifting with the MCAS, so the test scores. I think we famously, shot down the idea of using those scores then for graduation. We need something else. And having a plan as you're leaving school and being able to get credit as a school to say, yeah, they went into the military. Yeah, they went into it. They actually got a job and they're pursuing and they're thriving, right? Those kinds of outcomes is what every state, Kansas is on it, Indiana's on it. We don't have a place yet in Massachusetts to kind of collect and house all of that. And the MyCAP portfolio could very well be it. So rather than focusing on it as the full MyCAP, it's focusing on everyone needs a plan. And the MyCAP is a process for helping them get that plan built up, and it's something they'll be doing each year. And I think just to answer Lindsay's question and the piece too, that every year it's being updated, it's being evolving every year. So yes, students change their interest and they hopefully build the capacity to aspire to things they never thought possible. So I think there's a lot that can happen in this space as we go forward. But I'll pause there. I get a little too long-winded, so I have to
No, that's-
stop off.
That's terrific, Scott.
I'd also just love to follow up too, that I think it's really important to think about legislation for school counselors, especially, things like for teachers, there's a requirement that all teachers get mentoring their first year. School counselors don't have that same mandate in the Department of Education, at least here in Massachusetts. And so I think when you're thinking about legislation, anything that could help support the work of school counselors, I would be appreciated. Erin, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I'm excited. We have a new executive director of school counseling in Boston Public Schools, Caitlin Gilligan, who has been an incredible champion. I think in weaving this in and making sure that these are interconnected systems. Again, speaking to the connective piece, right? This is comprehensive school counseling in action. We are doing individualized planning with students. And so that means that our counselors need the space and time to do that work effectively, to be trained, to have support. And so I do think that is a critical piece. And as we think about, what our BPS schools look like, making sure that our ratios are good, that our counselors have access to time with students, the time piece is critical. So yeah, I appreciate you elevating that, Jodi.
I just want, if I could just jump in quickly on that same point, Jodi. I think another area which would be interesting to explore, so I don't want to get too much hate mail from my colleagues here, but I think we should also be looking at mandating that educators need to get trained in career development, right? They need to have some, and I'm not saying that they're becoming career specialists, but they're learning how the curriculum looks, what the learning objective design, how to participate. Jodi, you gave such a great example of math, and we've had other great examples in social studies. So figuring out how they can begin to incorporate this naturally throughout the curriculum is something that I think they need help with as well. And there should be pre-service kinds of outcomes that we're looking at. So I think that would be a really exciting way, because now educators walk in the building saying, when do we get started? Right. And because they see the value and the nature of it. So that's my 2 cents. My latest thought of advocacy is thinking for my poor, and I know my teacher prep crew is going, no, we don't need one more thing to do. But I do wonder if this might be something to look at.
Mandy is in the audience asking a great question. And hi, Mandy, it's nice to know that you're out there. Wondering about work with connecting with families. I know we mentioned that briefly earlier, but could we expand a little bit on that? I'd love for someone to talk a little bit about how we connect this work with families. Maybe Jodi, do you want to jump in, or Sugeily? I saw that you.
Yeah, I love that question, because it's something that we're thinking of, especially. I think the parents from last year got to see the success of the career fair, and in particular that our student government were the one hosting our career reps, and kids going back into their homes and having conversations with parents. So as we're trying to figure out what that looks like at the Curly, I know that one thing that we're doing is we're printing out the personality assessments. We're printing out just assessment reports and sharing that with students to bring home and sharing it with parents as a conversation starter. I know that we want a little bit more tangible activities that we're doing with parents, but I think that what we want to do is also teach parents the language, because parents are already doing the work. I did a pre and post survey last year, and I asked students where do you talk about careers in the future? And most of them said home. A very small percentage said at school. So that's the results of when we first started MyCAP in September. So parents are doing the work. They're already talking about this. And so I think that sharing whether it's lessons or like summaries of the lessons and assessments. It's something that we are starting to do to give them more, to challenge their thinking as well, but also give them language, and hopefully the end goal will be common language between home and school.
Oh, sorry.
No, please, Jodi, please.
We have, so again, I'll just give an example. So we have a requirement at our school called Junior Review, where students do a presentation about their sort of, experience in high school up until junior year, and then where they're going afterwards. And families are invited to that. But one of the components of Junior Review is their network. And for a 16-year-old, their network is often members of their family. And so we have them do this activity where they're bringing in members of their family to, sort of interview them and say how they're supporting them, where they're connected to sort of their future goals, how they're, sort of the cultural influences, the, career influences that their families had on them. And so that's just one way that we bring in families.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you. I'm noticing that we are starting to wind down on our time, and it always goes by so quickly, so I'm disappointed in that. But I don't want us to leave without recognizing that I think, Scott, you're doing a lot of pretty profound research related to this, and I'm wondering if there's anything that you can highlight for us that helps us understand either the scale or the impact of this work more broadly.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That'd be great. I want to try to connect to some of the, I've got a whole set of notes here, starting with Erin's comment about being a connector. And I think that that's such a great framing for what the nature, when people say, well, what is this really about? Well, we have a whole bunch of initiatives going on. We've got, I'm so proud to have a college with expertise in English learners with Yasuko Kano, right? That's really looking at college readiness from that lens. MyCAP is about that, right? It's about helping each student elevate and see their opportunities and then start putting plans in place. It's about, we've heard great stories about disability and the transition planning that has always been a problem nationally. And now we have a MyCAP where everyone's getting a transition plan, and the pieces that go with that and how that elevates things. I think the key elements that make this work is we're building youth's ability to aspire to something they never thought they could do. So quick story on that. We had a student graduate from one of our schools in Boston that graduated the week before they graduated. They got their certificate in cosmetology. Then they graduated and then started at Northeastern in engineering. So wow, what is that about? Well, MyCAP's about identity. It's about them seeing themselves in places they never would have thought about. And it's so powerful. And we've got great longitudinal data from OECD that really shows the case that when they start aspiring to something that they didn't think of before, they get better earnings as young adults. They're more likely to be employed as young adults. And it's also, and I know you both talked about the need to have our higher ed in there so we can have these great conversations. It turns out that for every single one of those caring and encouraging conversations that student can recall as young adults, actually shows up as a value on how much more income they're making. They actually have the dollar amount multiplied by a certain amount, and each one multiplied doubles and triples and quadruples. So these are very powerful mechanisms for human development that we now know, and we can now rest assured this is the way we want to go. I think the other thing we're looking at is the whole social emotional learning skills. What I loved hearing about was, so the student says they want to be an athlete. Great, let's look at your talent. There's basketball's got great talent. How does that transfer to the world of work, right? And then what are some of the other talents we have? And so this idea of helping youth become aware of the various, what we call now durable skills, the human skills that they have, which all employers are looking for: working in groups, communicating effectively, being there on time, being responsible. All of these key skill sets is what we're also helping elevate in the MyCAP so that they see the value to their future as well as what's going to happen in the classroom. So just a whole bunch. I also wanted just one last one. I heard it all the way through. The thing that happened in MyCAP that really got it going when I was starting to work with states on this is all means all. And all means every educator. It means every student. It means every parent, right? It's an all means all attitude. We're all here to work to support everyone in making it through. So I think it's just a powerful climate that happens in the schools when people have hope and they have a sense of future. So I'll stop there. I know I can keep going. I know we're out of time. I got you. I see the head nod, Dean. Bishop. I see the
No.
nod.
The nod was to the idea of hope. I just love that framing. And I think that reminds me of the impact that having a sense of purpose has on our young people's lives, and how we know that having a sense of purpose actually has all kinds of positive impacts: mental health, academic performance, life satisfaction. Like when our young people feel a sense of purpose in life, they will have better lives. And it's a really a hopeful perspective. So that's what the nod was for. It wasn't the hook.
Okay. No,
But
this was so fantastic, and
yeah,
this is why I get so inspired in seeing how this work gets played out and seeing the engagement in the schools. It's just amazing,
it's great.
just amazing.
It's great stuff. So thank you, Erin and Jodi and Sugeily and Scott. I've really learned a lot today, and I'm really impressed by the work, and excited to hear more about the continued impact as the work continues. I'd also like to thank the audience for your participation. We really appreciate that you show up and are interested in the work and the things that we discuss. If you'd like to learn more, check out our Center for Future Readiness, or if you're interested in exploring an advanced degree, there are some resources that we'll put up on the screen as well. And finally, I really hope to see you for our next Conversations with the Dean webinar. That'll be held on January 23. That's 2025. That's pretty amazing. Where we'll discuss school leadership from both a research and practice perspective. So really excited to have that opportunity. Hope to see you then. And until then, have a very safe and healthy and rejuvenating holiday.